Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Welcome to episode 237. This week, we bring another installment of our new series, Literary Lethality, to the Scuttlebutt. In this series, we'll be doing a deep dive into the Commandant's professional reading list, exploring various titles, and talking to different authors about some of the books on the list. Today, we welcome Ian Brown back to the show. Ian has been on a few times participating in our World of Wargaming series and is one of the most prolific advocates for the benefits of wargaming and robust military education. He's also the author of A New Conception of War, John Boyd, the U.S. Marines, and Maneuver Warfare, and Snowmobiles and Grand Ideas, John Boyd's Vision for Thriving in Chaos. Ian talks to us about A New Conception of War, the genesis of the project, and what it means to him to have his book on the Commandant's professional reading list 3 years running. And more than anything, why A New Conception of War deserves to be on the Commandant's professional reading list. This is episode 237.
Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Scuttlebutt. We have some literary lethality this week with a discussion of a book that is on the Commandant's professional reading list. We have in studio, first off, Vic. Vic,
Hi.
how you doing?
Doing well, thanks.
And we also have Ian Brown, the author of A New Conception of War, John Boyd, the U.S. Marines, and Maneuver Warfare. Ian, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Happy to be back here with you guys and excited to talk about this book that I never thought it would be where it is right now, but I'm so happy it is, and I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, third time on, so...
Yes, let's keep it going. So to start off with, you begin the book with an interesting anecdote, talking about how you're in this, taking a course, you have to talk about military theorists, everyone's doing Clausewitz, Jomini, all those lovely people, and you try to be smart and switch up by mentioning John Boyd. So first off, tell us how that paper went on Boyd, and second of all, talk about a little bit how you introduced yourself to Boyd in the first place to feel comfortable enough to even begin to write a paper on him.
Yeah, so I won't spoil the opportunity for readers to read it, but yeah, this was a lesson in like when you try and act smarter than your teacher, and it turns out your teacher's a lot smarter than you think they are. And as you said, it was I was doing a master's in military history through Norwich University. I think I am starting in like 2014, going into 2015, and about halfway through the program, you do a course on military thought and theory, and the capstone paper is you have to write something that summarizes the key high points of theories of a major military theorist from history, right? So as I said in the book, like most of my fellow students were civilians, and so and I already sort of seen in the course of the discussions we'd had, like, I figured they were going to default to like the big names where there's already been a lot of stuff written about them, so you can
Sun Tzu.
So that you've got a lot of stuff you can pull and use in your paper to reference it, right? Like Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, Jomini, Mahan, things like that. So I wanted to be special and different, right? So I was like, I'm gonna write about John Boyd, and when I made that decision, I did not really know a tremendous amount about Boyd, his impact on the Air Force, his impact on the Marine Corps, or really anything more than sort of a couple of data points. Like one, that he did have some influence on the Marine Corps and impacted the development of maneuver warfare ideas and doctrine, into the OODA loop, right, which everybody kind of knows about, associated with Boyd. So that was my strategy for trying to punk my professor and be like, yeah, I'm gonna write about somebody you don't know about. And I did this also because my professor was a retired Canadian colonel. He was a Canadian armor regiment for his whole career. So my assumption was like, oh, he's not from an American military background. And so if me as a Marine knows barely anything about Boyd from my own doctrine that I've, grown up with for the last 10 years or so, there's no way this guy is going to know anything about John Boyd. And I can at least present him with something that's a little bit, new and different and refreshing, instead of reading the millionth essay on Sun Tzu and, being far and appearing to be near, right? At least it'll be refreshing and different. I sent him my proposal in an email, and he sent me back like a couple sentences saying, and feel free to beep this out if you want, but Marine, this is what he always called me in the class, Marine, never by my name. Marine, Boyd is one of my favorites. Don't fuck it up. I was like, oh man, that backfired badly. Yeah. I'm going to have to really do a good job on this thing. And as it turned out, so he was a great professor, but he was able to offer me a lot of resources because he had done a doctorate study looking at different types of military theory and trying to sort of build a framework for how to differentiate like tactics, techniques, and procedures from doctrine, from sort of strategic thought to theory to like philosophy. So like this, it was trying to build a taxonomy essentially of sort of where these things fall out, because we mislabel these things all the time, right? Like we might call call an air campaign a strategy, whereas that might actually just be a collection of tactics, techniques, and procedures that are done over a long period of time. So he had done a lot of his own research, and he was great in helping me find resources, to include pointing me toward Marine Corps resources here in Quantico in the History Division. But so I ended up, I wrote the paper, right? So I tried to do a good job. And as sort of the process of learning for myself and writing that paper, I was like, wow, this story of how Boyd influenced the Marine Corps, one, is fascinating, but two, I had no freaking idea, right? So I when it came time to do the final like capstone thesis for the entire program, I said I wanted to like expand. Like I really wanted to dig back in and find out more about this story, as much like out of my own interest as a Marine, as trying to have a good paper for my capstone. Because the more I dug into it, I'm like, this is a fascinating story, not just about one man, John Boyd, and sort of how he came to his own ideas about conflict and competition, but also about how he influenced an institution, but also about how that institution was like open and receptive at a certain point in time in history for change, like knew it needed to change and was trying to figure out what shape that change needed to look like. And so all of this was just like, I'm like, I didn't know any of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna teach myself in writing this thesis, and see what else I learned along the way, because I just found it fascinating.
It seems a lot like when folks do those DNA tests, and then they learn like so much more about their background and
Yeah.
who they are and their ancestry, and then they just want to really dive in, because now it's illuminated a lot of things about where they are, who they are, and again, things that they had no idea about, but it all of a sudden starts to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that's why I left, like, short answer for going from like the thesis to working with Marine Corps Union Press to write a book about it was, it was part of that, like, we have maneuver warfare doctrine, and we still have MCDP-1 warfighting, which is our capstone warfighting philosophy, right? But like the why behind all of that is something that sort of once you were a later generation of Marine and you left the very distinct like historical, cultural, military environment that maneuver warfare was formed in, and that John Boyd, and the Marine Corps was swimming in, like the farther removed you were from that, like the less you knew the why behind, like why was maneuver warfare, why was warfighting so important and impactful at the time it was, to the point where, I don't know about your experience, but like my Marine Corps career, right, starting in 2003, my connection with warfighting and John Boyd and the OODA loop was you get handed warfighting at like, OCS or TBS, and you study it and you spit some of it back to your instructors. Maybe you touch on it again in EWS or command and staff, but that's like years later, right? After you first touched it. And then at least on the aviation side, like we would get some tactics briefs where like they talk about the OODA loop in the cockpit as a decision-making process, and like you're trying to think faster than your opponent's aircraft, but that was really it.
Yeah.
And there just wasn't much more of like, why does this matter?
Yeah, and we'll definitely touch on this in our later parts of the discussion, but like this idea that there's something that's institutionalized that even the people teaching it don't fully understand, at least in its complexity, and definitely not in its evolution.
Yeah, and now maybe we'll get to a Marvel Cinematic Universe version later, or not. Maybe we won't. But
no, we will. We're going to do Marvel.
But as you described, it kind of reminds me of, I've been watching Fallout lately.
Okay.
And,
yeah, that's great.
And in some ways, it's similar. Like Fallout, you've got like, what is it, the Brotherhood of Steel, and some of these other like these small groups in this post-apocalyptic wasteland,
California Republic.
Yeah. So you have all of these fragments of like old civilization but nobody sort of remembers, or they know the why, right? Where
Right.
you've got the Brotherhood of Steel searching for all of these artifacts in the wasteland, which are like, they're important because they have some mystical connection with the past, but they don't really know why it matters. They just like they know they want it, right? Just like we know we want to do maneuver warfare, but we don't know like why it mattered, why that was chosen as an approach to warfighting as opposed to other things, and why it has continued as our doctrine up through today.
Yeah.
Well, let's dig into your book a little bit. So explain a little bit the historiography of John Boyd, the maneuver warfare movement with the Marine Corps, and then talk about sort of the gap that you saw within your research, and then how you wrote this book to fill that gap.
Okay, so there's a lot there, and I'll try and keep it concise, although I'm not usually great at doing that. So the short version of the Nexus, I'm not going to go into Boyd's biography, but the point was, first of all, listeners, you should go read my book, right? But you should also, there's also other biographies of Boyd out there that talk about his whole military career. He was an Air Force guy. Before he ever like sort of linked up with the Marine Corps, he had already had a long career as something of a maverick, a gadfly that liked to poke at institutions to make them uncomfortable, but also tell them uncomfortable things that were right, but they needed to hear. But he also had a very a scientific mind, right? Like he was an engineer. He specifically helped develop F-15 and F-16 airframes, and I think in addition to a basic theory of how aircraft shed and gain energy in the air, which someday the F-15 and the F-16 maybe they'll be replaced, but like they're still flying and they're fighting right now, right? Like they're doing stuff over in Iran. So it's obviously they were good enough platforms that they had a long shelf life. Like just upgrade them because they're really good at their core. But they'll go away someday. But like his energy maneuverability equation that explains how aircraft shed and gain energy through flight is something that like every single aircraft design draws from in the process. And it is something that from a tactical perspective is still taught to all aviators today. It doesn't matter what your aircraft is. Like I flew the CH-53 helicopter, not doing a lot of like tactical, yanking and banking stuff against enemy aircraft. Hopefully, like you never want to get in that situation, right? Because it's not great for you because you're slow. You're a big fat target that spits out lots of IR energy that can be locked onto. However, we get energy maneuverability diagrams that show where like the 53 in certain altitudes and airspeeds actually has an advantage in terms of like turn radius, climb and descent compared to certain types of jet aircraft. So like you would think like, all right, a 53 going up against a MiG, you're going to lose that fight, right? And I would not want to put money on who's going to win that fight. However, depending on how the MiG is maneuvering, the second they go past you, right, if you can sort of avoid an initial engagement, the second they shoot past you, you are slow enough that you can like turn, dive, and get down into the ground in a very tight and rapid manner while they're still booming 10 miles away. And by the time they turn around and come back, you're gone. You've gone down into the terrain to go hide and make their job harder. That's what the energy maneuverability theorem in the charts that are derived from it explain. So that was a long way of saying before Boyd got to the Marine Corps, he was already doing really impactful stuff for the Air Force that has like direct effect on how people employ their aircraft. And oh, by the way, he designed the aircraft too. Like, right, that's great. Right. But after leaving the Air Force, he had a very inquisitive mind, and so he sort of like sunk his teeth into a few different data points from his career to try and explain not just like what makes a good aircraft, but like what makes you successful in competition and conflict in sort of a general sense, right? Not just military stuff, but in sort of human survival. And this led him to a very abstracted exploration of how to survive, basically, which was sort of the first thing that he wrote, his essay, Destruction and Creation, which includes a lot of science in it to sort of explain the theory. But then, like, his mind was kind of restless, and so from that, he's like, this essay is my theory. Let me go find, is there any evidence in the real world to support this? And that's what led him to start creating all these different briefings that he would present to different military and civilian audiences sort of starting late 70s, going into the 80s. And this is where he started intersecting with the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps, late 70s, coming out of Vietnam, right, was going through a lot of churn. There were a lot of like larger external social dynamics in play going on in the United States at the time. A lot of internal issues with like discipline and different things, not just the Marine Corps, but in the U.S. military.
Right.
It was kind of at a low point. But as part of this, like, we just got out of Vietnam, we don't have, like, nobody left there with good feelings, right? And so many of the services, to include the Marine Corps, were trying to figure out, all right, how do we do better next time? And different services sort of follow different paths. But the Marine Corps started looking at the problem set of how do we do better next time? And the next time could potentially be the Soviet Union, which was not idle during Vietnam. It sent its tactics, techniques, and procedures to its client states. It sent its weapons to its client states. So you had all these, African or Middle Eastern or other client countries, that were modeled on the Soviet Union. And then there's the Soviet Union itself that's still there, still a not a belligerent, but an adversary, right? And what if Marine Corps call up, next time to go up against the Soviet Union, how does it do better than Vietnam? But we can't change how many Marines we have. Like, we're the smallest service, don't have a lot of budget. So, like, we're never going to have as much gear as the Army, never as many planes as the Air Force or the Navy, never as many people. But we want to do better than Vietnam. How do we do that? So this is about the time Boyd is talking about his approach to competition and conflict, where it's not about material numbers per se, but it's about how you think about organizing and operating against your adversary. And the material stuff does matter, but what also matters is more intangible stuff, like your cognitive processes, how you train your people, how you empower your people in terms of giving them responsibility, giving them autonomy. And that's what his presentations, his briefings talked about. And I don't know exactly which Marine was the first one, but like, he started getting in front of Marine audiences, and they were like, this could work for us, right? Like, this is the framework where we don't need to ask for more money, because we're never going to get more money. We don't need to ask for more people, because we're never going to get more people. But if we sort of take this frame with this lens for looking at conflict and apply it across our institution and train our people and organize our people to think this way, we could still potentially, gain advantages on a battlefield against a larger Soviet adversary and succeed, right? Achieve our nation's objectives the way that we believe we failed to do in Vietnam.
I kind of look at it a little bit like Rocky 2, right? So in Rocky 1, he fights against Apollo Creed in the standard way that you would do boxing. Then in Rocky 2, I think it's Rocky 2, Apollo Creed actually teaches him how to maneuver, right? To stay light on your feet, to dance around, to not have to try to, because like you said, he's not going to get any bigger, he's not going to get any stronger.
Yeah, trying to slug it out.
Right.
If you're the smaller guy is a bad strategy.
Right.
Right. So, but that doesn't mean that you can't win. It
right.
just means you need a different approach.
Right. So he starts to learn how to be lighter on his feet and take his.
Stop leading with your face and try some other stuff.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And then and you talk about sort of the where the Marine Corps was, and then where John Boyd was, and sort of this meeting. There's a nexus there, right? And shameless plug, it was the Gazette.
Yeah, that was a huge part of it. And in the pre-internet age, the printed publications are still a core way of sharing ideas. And like, for anyone who's looked at the history of the Gazette back in, you could go all the way back to the time of General Lejeune, right? Like, he wanted it to be a forum for discussion, and that's what it was for decades. And even before the maneuver warfare stuff was going on, like, if you look at some of the articles coming out of late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of like, what do we need to change, right? We don't really know. We're not sure yet what that change needs to look like. But what we did back there, it didn't work, right? I think I mentioned in the book, like the last image of Vietnam of the American presence there is freaking helicopters leaving off the roof, right?
Yeah.
While people are on the ground are hoping they're the last people out before the North Vietnamese roll through Saigon. So we cannot do that again. Not acceptable. What do we do to ourselves to make sure that that is not the case in the next conflict? And it's interesting because if John Boyd hadn't been around, don't really know what shape the next thing might have looked like. And it's interesting. One of the things I do mention in the book is I'm talking to retired Colonel Mike Wiley. He in sort of pushing back against some of the other Boyd historiography that's out there, which we may or may not go into if you want to. But there's there's a narrative out there in some of the Boyd historiography that's like people in the Marine Corps were sort of these these people lost in the wilderness looking for a way, and Boyd came in and saved them and, gave them a light, and it was like the pillar of fire leading them. Wiley was like, no. All right. Like we were already trying to figure out like we need to change. What is the next thing we look like? If Boyd hadn't come along, it might have looked like something else, right? Maybe it was a different piece of doctrine. Maybe we would have organized ourselves differently. But this idea that sort of there's Boyd and then his acolytes who have been saved by him and then follow him. He's like, that's nonsense. Like we were already looking for the thing. Boyd at a great time in history gave us what looked to us like a good framework for how to think about what the next fight would look like. But we were already looking for that next thing ourselves. Like we didn't need saving necessarily, but he definitely gave us something that was incredibly valuable at a time when we were looking for something.
We were already on a change glide slope.
Yeah.
It wasn't that we were just going to stick with the old stuff and make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where does your book come into the equation now of sort of changing how Marines perceive John Boyd?
Yeah, so you'd mentioned like what gap am I trying to fill with this thing? Because there have been books written about Boyd before. I am not the first, nor is this the first one to be on the Commandant's reading list that talks about Boyd. But there were a few things at play. So first was like a lot of the pre-existing biographies of Boyd or pre-existing sort of more academic and abstracted analysis of his thought. They looked at sort of like the fullness of Boyd, but like sort of I wanted to zero in on the Marine Corps story here, because like the Marine Corps story is told in bits and pieces in some of these different books, but it wasn't all together in one place, right? It was scattered across books. It was scattered across Gazette articles. Some of it was scattered in archival materials over at the Marine Corps History Division.
Presentations too, right?
Yeah, presentations too. Like they're just, I wanted to I didn't want to tell the Boyd story, the whole Boyd story in a new way, like just over again. But I wanted to capture the Marine Corps edition of the Boyd story in one place. And that was a large part of that was me not knowing any of that story when I started this research. Like I was like, man, I really wish somebody had told me, like, given me something that could have told the story about not just Boyd, but the Marine Corps as
right.
as an institution that changed and adapted, and then outputted. Like you all gave me MCD people in warfighting, but you didn't tell me why we got it in the first place, or why I should really pay attention to it later on.
These aren't golden tablets from the sky, right? Like what is?
Yeah, they came from somewhere.
Genesis, right?
So I wanted to capture the story of where, like, how all that stuff came from in one place, so that like future me down the road could be like, oh, like I can find that story in one place, and I don't have to read a bunch of different books of varying degrees of quality and accurate history, or I love the Gazette archives, and I love the History Division archives. It's a lot of work to go through that to sort of find stuff. I want to give it. I want it all in one place. Mm-hmm. Because Marines are busy people; they don't all have time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, your footnotes are extensive, which is really helpful for anybody looking to do the deep dive that you did without having to create the process on their own.
Yeah,
and you have the appendices and everything, so that It's really helpful.
Well, it was helpful that I was stationed at Quantico at the time, so I could be like, hey, I was over at the Davis building at CD&I, so I was like, hey, I'm going to go for an extended lunch over in the archives and just dig through that stuff, or dig through, all the back issues of the Gazette. Like, it was great.
Yeah.
It would have been harder if I were not physically here at the time to be able to do that. But then, so that was like the main thing, is like I wanted to write the story that I wish I had when I started studying Boyd and his impact on the Marine Corps. And then as sort of the research and the writing continued, I also felt that there were some parts of the narrative that deserved correction, because some of the previous Boyd books are written more to tell a good entertaining story, in very sort of David versus Goliath type ways, and not necessarily tell what really happened, or
so there was a mythology behind it.
Yeah, there was a bit of a mythology, and as I dug into the archives and got a chance to talk directly to people like Mike Wiley, or dig into some of like the unpublished oral histories for guys like John Schmidt, who wrote MCDP-1 Warfighting, right? Like, as I started getting to it, I'm like, this does not match what the mythology says. So not a central driving force for the book, but as I went through it, part of it was like there are things Marines did as part of this process that like Boyd didn't do. Marines did them, and they deserve to have that story told accurately. I think especially the development of initially FM-FM1 warfighting, and then later MCDP-1. But in some of the mythology, like John Schmidt, the guy who wrote that, he's not mentioned by name at all. He's mentioned like sort of as an by the way, as a struggling captain who was trying to write this doctrinal manual, but he got bogged down. So again, like Boyd swoops in and saves the day, right? And if you look at you talk to the people who were there at the time, and to include Schmidt, like talking about his own writing process, like that is bullshit. Like Boyd did a lot of great things, but Schmidt was not just like a ghostwriter for him, right? Like warfighting is a brilliant, unique synthesis of not just Boyd, but other military theorists like Sun Tzu and Clausewitz and other things, as well as other sort of scientific theories like chaos theory, nonlinear thought, unpredictability, that Schmidt synthesized in a short 90-page book, right? Boyd didn't do that. Schmidt did that. Yeah. But the mythology takes Schmidt out of the story. So I wanted to put him back. Same thing with Colonel Wiley's comment about, he didn't like the term acolyte because it implied that they were lost and needed to be saved. And he was like, no, we were already looking. Boyd came at a great time, had great ideas that, we took some of them and we sort of framed them for our own purposes. But, we didn't need a savior. We were looking because we knew we needed to change.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things it sort of became a secondary driver in trying to get that out, accurately. Because I just think, like, I was doing a degree in history. You tell the correct story, whether or not like it's as entertaining. And I think the accurate story is a better story because it puts more Marines into it to show how they took the ideas, but they are the ones who had to sort of shape them, figure out how their organization was going to, take these theories and turn them into practical application.
Well, especially facing an existential threat like we always do after major conflicts.
Yeah. And then I'd say sort of after the book got published, and then when I started talking about it a little bit more as we were getting into sort of the Force Design 2030 process.
Yeah.
The sort of a third purpose for the book that I hadn't really envisioned when I wrote it, but sort of like I came to realize was like, this is actually weird. The institution now is going through change again. Yeah. This is a story of how we did it before, and sort of the churn that happens when you change the institution. But also that we are able to change course when we recognize something is insufficient and we need to adapt to whatever the next threat over the horizon is, right? And so, like, hey, we're doing that right now. This is the last time we did that in a major way institutionally. So, hey, Marines, if you're grappling with, what and how force design is going to reshape the Marine Corps, to face 21st century threats. Not our first rodeo, right? We did it back then. And oh, by the way, the farther back you can go farther back in Marine Corps history. I talk a little bit about it in Chapter 1, but like one of the things that the Marine Corps is actually really good at is adapting and changing as new threats emerge, old threats go away, and just adapting and being ready to be that first responder and be relevant. Like when that change comes, hey, we've already thought about it. We're ready to go.
Yeah.
And I think it's not going to be the same as it was for nuclear warfare going through the changes today, but we've done it before, right? And it's not new, it's not radical, and it's not like, changing ourselves doesn't, flush any past traditions or great accomplishments down the toilet, but we change, right?
Yeah.
If we want to be relevant, we have to change to be the thing, the president calls on, when the situation demands it. You send in the Marines, right?
Yeah.
And he's not going to do that if you are not ready and relevant to accomplish the mission he's given you.
Yeah. It's a feature, not a bug. It's ability to adapt. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, it's great. Like you want to stay relevant because if you're not, you will go away or be told to go away. And there's a number of times in the Marine Corps history where they came close to that happening, and the Marine Corps had to, prove and justify why do we have this fourth major branch that it duplicates certain things from the other branches, but what makes it special is how it takes those things and puts them together and uses them in a different way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think we just had another shameless plug. We just had the Commandant in here, and I think he mentioned that we have like the 17th largest Air Force in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, I mean, our Air Force is larger than some nations' Air Force.
Yeah.
Like our Air Force, the Air Wing.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So we talked about your actual geolocation as you were writing this. We talked about sort of the environment that John Boyd and the Marine Corps was facing at the time. We talked a little bit about, force design and things. So what is it that, like, where are we sitting now in this environment that, like, what audience are you trying to talk to as we're in another sort of period of transition? Who's the audience that this book was trying to speak to? I know when you wrote it, obviously, is vastly different than where we are now here in the sound studio. But, I think because we were both in Quantico at the same time, and we were still fairly entrenched. I mean, there were writing on the wall that we were starting to draw down, but I mean, we were still very entrenched in two counterinsurgencies in two different theaters.
Yeah. So I mean, when I first wrote it, like I said, the audience is sort of, its intended audience has grown, right? If I'm being like perfectly honest, initially I kind of wrote it, like I said, for future me, because I'm like, man, I hope future me, if somebody's researching Boyd's influence on the Marine Corps, I can save you a lot of trouble by putting like the high points in one place. I'll give you all the footnotes if you want to go read all, there's 40 Gazette articles. I'll give you the footnotes for all of those if you really want to go do that. But I can at least get the narrative in one place so that you don't have to go to all these different sources to try and find the narrative. And two, provide you with what I think is, as accurate as I can get it, what really happened in this the story of Boyd and the Marines, in that nexus coming together.
So is your intent then to reach to kind of like history and sort of military strategy nerds, or were you looking for this to be something that the active force would be using?
I hoped Marines would read it, right? Yeah. And I went with Marine Corps University Press because Marines are my target audience, right? Yeah. And I think before it got on the Commandant's reading list, my greatest hope was that I just want, I personally found the story of Boyd and maneuver warfare and MCDP-1 and all that stuff. I found it fascinating. I found it explained why we still have that doctrine today, and so it helped me better understand. Oh, it's not just sort of 90 pages of wavetop philosophy, right? Like there is call it a couple of decades of real debate and thought and discussion on how we should organize to fight and how we should think about conflict. And I sort of was like, hey, if somebody ever hands you MCDP1, you can understand why it matters. If you pair it with this, right, it explains the why for how we got here. And I would hope that it's Marines who are doing the pairing of the doctrine with the book to understand the why. And if it helps Marines understand a little bit better, like, why you should take MCDP1 off the shelf a little bit, or maybe think about how you can practice a maneuver warfare mindset more in your own organization. Great. Like that was sort of like the scope of my ambition. So published in 2018, but then 2019 it got put on the Commandant's reading list, which, like, little secret voice inside of me is always like, it'd be great, right? Like, if that would happen. But I'm like that. I had zero expectation that would ever happen, because I've seen the other books that are on the reading list, right? Like, it's a very selective group of books. And
which is why we're doing this series.
But I'm like, it'd be great, but like I had no expectation, and like I certainly didn't like take any action to try and get it on there myself, because I didn't think it would get there. But I remember I had just started I PCS here 2019. I was working over at the Krulak Center over in the Library of the Marine Corps, and I'd sort of made friends with one of the digital librarians over there, because I saw her every day coming, going through the library, going upstairs. And when it got put on the reading list, like she came by my cubicle. I wasn't there, but like she came by and she dropped this pamphlet that had the latest edition, like kind of pre-release of what the new Commandant's reading list was going to be. And she had this little sticky note that said, "I've been biting my tongue for so long because I wanted to tell you, but I had to wait until it was out. So here it is. Congratulations. Like, good job."
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, this is a great day. This is a great day to be me. And then, the Almar came out with the new reading list, and it was just kind of like surreal to see, that it was on there. And like, it went from my hope that some Marines would read it and have a better understanding of their own story to, hey, Marines, you are going to read this because the Commandant has deemed it's important enough to devote time to and use it as part of your broader thinking about our approach to warfare and our approach to fighting as an institution. So achievement unlocked, right? It was fantastic. And I could not have hoped for like a higher, impact of that book than to have that little medallion that's on the cover right now. It says it's on the Commandant's reading list. And then, it was also, just because you hit the reading list once doesn't mean you're going to stay, because they revise it every few years. But it's on, as you said, the third iteration now, and it's stayed on there as the Boyd book about maneuver warfare, and it's replaced previous Boyd books about maneuver warfare as, the current standard. I hope it stays the standard down the road. Maybe someday somebody else writes the next great one and surpasses it. But it's been, I wrote it for Marines, but I never thought it would have it would be something that is required as part of your professional development. Yeah. To read that book, which is really, like, I love it, and it's really, it really is, humbling to know that the Commandant thought this was worth, like, of the 20 or 30 books on the list, one of the slots goes to that narrative.
Right.
So what I want to ask you now then is, as you look forward thinking, at some point someone's going to rewrite the book. When you write, you oftentimes come up with more questions than answers. What are some questions now, having written this book, that you have about Boyd that you would like to have answered?
So it's funny because part of how I did come up with more questions, because when I wrote that, I had started using a transcript of one of his presentations, sort of the main one that Marines heard, which was Patterns of Conflict. And it's basically a military history presentation that intermeshes his thoughts on competition and survival and conflict, taking you through military history, through a couple thousand years of it, to sort of show, like, hey, this is where my ideas, this is how they actually fit in there, and this sort of helps define, like, why we're some successful and why we're not within this conceptual framework of conflict. And then I think it was, I want to say it was after the book got published, I had the opportunity to help teach a course that the continuing education program used to have. Unfortunately, it's gone now, but it was called Beyond Boyd, where it took parts of my book, but it also took a lot of Gazette stuff. It took Sun Tzu, and it was sort of like an accelerated pathway into how we got to maneuver warfare in MCDP1, but then looking past it, right? How do we apply it today? So I think coming out of that book, and then as we sort of entered the force design era, I started thinking like, what would Boyd say today? What other ideas does he have that might be relevant to the world we're living in? And that drove me to start working on the second book about Boyd, which is it's not a history of the Marine Corps. This is, I call it the definitive Boyd or the final one, but it's getting all of his other presentations to be publicly accessible so you can explore more of his thought, because in Patterns of Conflict, he touches on a few things like not just fighting, but like grand strategy, how using narrative and clearly articulated national goals and then pairing your actions with those goals in order to improve your position of survival in the world as you're interacting with other nations. And I really what kind of accelerated looking at that aspect of Boyd was first it was Russia's invasion of Ukraine, because coming out, let's back up to the Nagorno-Karabakh War, right, which kind of predated it. To me, that was the first time I was really cognizant of a deliberate like messaging narrative arm in the strategy of one of those countries, like using video footage from like drone strikes and then spitting that stuff out across digital social media. Not just for the likes, but like as a active strategic message to the adversary to say, hey, not only are we're bombing your bunkers with our drones, right? But you can't stop us. We have the proof, and we're going to share it with everybody, to include your own people, to show you how helpless your situation is, and maybe get you to like surrender or come back to the table, so we can stop the war and end it favorable on our terms, because you can't stop us, and here's the proof. And then we fast forward into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and like the messaging, the information aspect of that war, it took off from day one and has continued through.
Well, I mean,
today.
It was a major aspect even before the war as we know it, because in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea, I mean, information was a major player.
Yeah, information and disinformation.
Right.
And I know that like 2014 was really when this whole thing started. I'll say like, I was aware of the takeover of Crimea. Did I deeply follow what happened between 2014 and 2022 after that? I didn't really,
right.
And maybe shame on me for not paying closer attention. But yeah, the information and disinformation were part of how that operation took over. And actually, I did pay attention to a point, because I wrote an article in 2016, I think, where I was calling for a third edition of MCDP1. It's in the Gazette. It's I think it's in a footnote in the book too. But looking at how Russia had used information and misinformation as sort of like a shaping operation to set conditions for their physical takeover of the country, right? I would not write that article the same way again, for a number of reasons. But at the time, that was like using information and narrative or counter narrative as tools, as weapons, essentially, to achieve objectives. And then we fast forward to so we look at 2022, Russia's invasion, and another data point was October 7th, right? Hamas's attack on Israel, Israel's response to that, and how information, misinformation, narrative, counter narrative shaped or had real physical impacts on the battlefields of Gaza and Ukraine, beyond just the bombs and the kinetic stuff happening there. And so I really felt that the full Boyd, all of his presentations, like, to me, that was the kind of a big thing that isn't really captured in the story here in New Conception of War, and not really captured in MCDP1. But there's a lot more to Boyd than just the OODA loop and gaining advantages in tempo to have military techs on the battlefield. He talks a ton about messaging and narrative and how that interlocks with grand strategy, and how you need to, and how if you have like a well-defined, articulated grand strategy and narrative and your actions back it up, how that whole nexus can actually work as a huge tool to get people on your side, right? To undermine your adversary by potentially peeling people, supporters away from your adversary onto your side. And then with the fence sitters, right, people in the middle, maybe they come onto your side, or maybe they stay in the middle, but at least they don't go to your adversary's side. And you achieve that not with, bombs, missiles, etc., but that nesting of narrative and strategy and how your actions back that up. That was really the sort of the big question that I only got a glimpse of when I wrote this book. But as Ukraine and then Gaza, these things unfolded, I really wanted to get the rest of that story in print and told, because I really think like the most impactful stuff of Boyd, honestly, it's not necessarily the stuff in New Conception of War. It's a lot of the other stuff that he talked about. It's just that stuff didn't have the same attention, as Maneuver and the OODA loop.
Right. And along those lines, then, one of the things that really I found very interesting in the epilogue portion of it was, you were talking narrative, counter-narrative, information, and even internal is, to be introspective, is that we have a communication issue. We have an information disinformation issue. And you mentioned this in the book, whereas we institutionally talk maneuver warfare almost as a trump card to any sort of discussion about what it is that we do and how we employ our forces. But then, especially in 10 years of counterinsurgency or 20 years of counterinsurgency, we, at the junior level, in the trenches, if you will, don't feel like we're executing maneuver warfare. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I say again that kind of that's a part of why I wrote the book, was because like I think if you better understand the doctrine and the philosophy, there are practical, like tactical deck plate, ground level, whatever you want to call it, applications. It's not all like 50,000 foot view, wave top, again, like
big blue arrow
big
stuff.
Philosophy. There are practical applications of it, right? And interestingly, as I think after I wrote the book, but then as I was giving presentations about the book to various audiences, I interacted with this one guy who was I think he was a staff sergeant at the time. He might be a gunny now, or he might be out. I'm not sure. But anyway, he was a light armored recon guy out in 29 Palms, and he was trying to at his level, right, with his guys, teach them maneuver principles, because they're recon, right? Like they're supposed to be out there operating alone and unafraid within commander's intent, but maybe not able to go back to higher. And he was saying how frustrated he was because it felt like he was going against like the cultural grain, at least like of the command that he was in, because he was never really allowed to truly go and execute those mission tactics, right? Like, I trust you. This is what I want you to do. You go do it. I'm trusting you to do it. If you need help, call me back. But otherwise, just go do it, right? And he would talk about how in a lot of their exercises, he had to slow down or stop his tempo like every 15 minutes to report back to higher with a sit rep. Like, this is where I am. This is what we're doing. Nothing's changed in the last 15 minutes. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. And he felt that was completely antithetical to what he was supposed to be doing as a recon guy. And he found it frustrating in a community that does talk more about, maneuver and commander's intent and having some autonomy, right? He was getting reeled back, by not by the doctrine, but by the command climate that had been put on him. And as he was talking about that, it made me realize on the aviation side, at least in the community that I was in, and I realized this can change based on sometimes what coast you're on or who your commander is, personalities, right? But my experience in the aviation world, I flew out of Miramar most of my career. We always talk about like going over the hill, right? Like you fly over the mountains from Miramar to the Yuma training area. You go over the hill, you are alone and unafraid, right? Like you are beyond line of sight of your squadron, and not only sort of do you have to, but you are expected. If something changes in your mission when you go over the hill, you adapt, right? You're the freaking aircraft commander, or you're the section leader or the flight leader. You've been given those designations because you've hopefully demonstrated judgment that you're able to act and adapt and change things without having to call back to hire, right? And so, like, if you're flying over and, hey, an LZ you were planning on doing confined area landings to, it's fouled or something, right? Or it's too freaking, because of weather, it's like super dusty and it's a little bit dangerous to do it there. Okay, you have the authority and you're expected. Go find another LZ to get the mission done. Or if you're falling behind timeline, right? You have to make a judgment call of what training events am I going to try and execute. Like, I had a freaking, I had a hot engine light, in the zone. I had to turn off the engine to go, get the crew chief to go look at it to make sure there's nothing actually wrong with it. But that chewed up like 45 minutes of my timeline now. I can't do all my training X's. Which ones do I go get? That's your call, right? That's your decision. And when you go back over the hill and get back to the squadron, right? You go and tell the operations officer who's going to tell the CO, like, hey, we didn't get these X's last night. This is why. You explain what happened, but like, you're expected to make those decisions, right? To do that prioritization, and as long as you're you will have to explain yourself, right? Like, there's no getting around that. But if you explain yourself, and if you explain what your judgment was at the time, if your judgment was sound, you thought, hey, in accordance with knowing the squadron's priorities, sir, like, we're all getting ready to go to do a detachment for training for low-level nighttime stuff. Like, my priorities was to make sure we got as many of the highlight level X's as we could, and like my guy who needed a couple of instrument approaches to build up for his instrument check in like 3 months. I'm sorry, but that's not the priority. We need those nighttime level X's. So that was why I did what I did, sir. And I cannot personally recall a time where if I had to adjust a training mission, the CO or the OPSO was like, why the beep did you do that, right? There's like, no, like, stuff happens, right? Like, and you are expected to adapt and to change, and not like stop and freeze and call back to hire. You're like, I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do. So it's just this contrast in different places in the Marine Corps where, like, in aviation, I felt like, as I talked to this recon guy, I'm like, I feel like I did a lot of maneuver warfare type stuff, but nobody ever called it that because, we're aviators, we're not nerds. We don't talk about doctrine in the ready room, right? We talk about tactics. We talk about threats. Shocker, we do not. We talk about emergency procedures, whereas this guy who lives in an environment where you would think it'd be they have to do it because that's their job, he felt like it wasn't happening. And so, I'm sorry, I kind of lost the thread of where the question was there.
I mean, that's the crux of it is that we at the higher levels talk about maneuver warfare being, not almost our culture, not even just our doctrine, but then at the lower level, the junior officers and the staff NCO at the staff NCO level, the trigger pullers, if you will, are saying, no, we don't do maneuver warfare because it is.
Yeah, so I think that's where I was going, which is like, is it done? It is, and it can be. It's just the full, like, cross-institutional culture that goes with it didn't sort of unfold. And I forget if I mentioned it in the conclusion or not, but I know that in the minds of some of the people who were affecting those changes at the time, in like early 90s when General Gray signed FMFM1, it took a lot of effort, a lot of churn within the institution just to get that manual signed and disseminated. There were a whole bunch of things that, okay, we've got the doctrine. How do we institutionalize it now? Which delves into things like how you recruit, how you train, how you do professional military education, how you teach your commanders, like, to have the proper command culture. And a lot of those folks back then were like, yeah, we never got those other pieces into place to truly institutionalize it across everybody. But it exists in some places, and often it's personality driven.
Yeah.
And again, kind of another hope for the book. I talk about in the conclusion, I think, like, I don't need you to have 100% maneuver warfare, mindset or culture, but if the book helps you understand the why, maybe it helps you practice it a little bit more at your level where you can, and that helps, cross institutionalize it, because the commandant can't come down to every single unit and spend 6 months watching them to get them up to be a 100% maneuver warfare type unit, right? But that's not his job, but that's also part of maneuver warfare, is pushing responsibility down to the lowest level.
Right.
That is your job, platoon commander. That is your job, platoon sergeant. That is your job, squadron, XO or OPSO. You have time with your Marines. You have the ability to decide some of the things they're going to train, they're going to learn, and you have the ability to set the example for how you want things to operate. So if you want the Marine Corps to be more of a maneuverist mindset, don't wait for the commandant to put another book about maneuver warfare on the reading list. You go do it, right? Because that's part of what Boyd in the book talks about is it is down. One of the great things about the Marine Corps, which I truly believe, and despite some of the frustrations of the staff chart and other places, is more often than not, we do push authority and responsibility down to low levels, and we expect people to use those, to train their Marines, to lead their Marines when the commander or the officers are not looking, right? So you've been given that authority. You go give your Marines more of a maneuver mindset, and don't wait for the commandant, or you go to PME once every 5 years, and that's your maneuver warfare touch point. No, right? You have the ability to do that. You have no excuse not to do it. Yeah. That's part of your responsibility. Go frickin' do it.
Nice.
Read my book and go frickin' do it.
Yeah, read the book first. Yes, and then.
Awesome. Well, Ian, thanks for coming on the show. Vic, do you have any final questions?
No, man, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and congratulations again on third time on the Commandant's professional reading list. So, man, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about your book, and congratulations again, man.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, I never. When I first tried to pull the pump card on my professor and failed, I never imagined that moment would lead down a path where it's required reading for Marines today.
Yeah.
But it's fantastic. I'm grateful for the people who behind the scenes gave the book the support to get it on the list. I'm grateful to General Berger for putting it on his list first, and for General Smith for continuing to have it on his list, and I hope the next commandant likes it too.
Yeah, awesome.
And to our dear audience, go ahead, buy it, read it, and
you don't have to buy it. That's the best part. It's free.
I'm trying to help you out, man.
Trying
to pay for your kids' college and whatnot.
I've never seen I didn't do this for the money.
Fair enough.
And the university press, they can't charge. It's a government press, but that's part of what I like about. I'm grateful to the press because they gave me the chance to turn my thesis into a book. But I also my wife does hate this because I do a lot of stuff without getting paid for it. But in some ways, I sort of take Boyd as a model for that, because he freely shared. If you wanted his brief, man, he would go and give it to you. No money, no questions asked. During when he was a consultant at the Pentagon in his later years, they had to pay him something to keep him on. So he's give me $1 a month, right? Not great for his family. I wouldn't necessarily take that approach. But the point is, he believed in the free, sharing, and good information should be shared and exchanged to make our military, make our people better, right? And so what royalties would be great, but I'd much rather have this on the Commandant's reading list and know that Marines are reading this book than any royalty check that comes down the road.
Well, amen to that. Well, audience, go ahead and read it. It's free. Have a good one.
Hey, Marta, how you doing?
Good, Vic. What's going on?
Oh, not too much. I heard through, a little birdie told me that we're into modern day Marine season. Actually, let me say, it wasn't a bird because it's way too cold outside for a bird to actually, but maybe I got a tweet or something. I just get a disconnect. But yeah, we're in modern day Marine season now, right?
We are in modern day Marine season. If I actually woke up last night, true story. I woke up last night thinking about my to-do list for modern day Marine. So, it's just so your listeners know, I'm the Marine Corps Association's lead planner for modern day Marine. And the to-do list in my brain is like, on constant. So I
Yeah.
woke up. So that's how I know. Birdies or no birdies, I know because I woke up in the middle of the night sort of dreading my
Yeah.
to-do list for monitoring. It's right around the corner and we are pumped.
Yeah, your brain is just one really long PowerPoint presentation. You're just thinking in slide decks at
It's
this point.
yeah. So between now and Showtime, Expo time on April 28th this year, that's pretty much what I'm going to be thinking about. What I'm going to be thinking about. Well, and you're going to be there too. Scuttlebutt's going to be there.
There are. Yeah, no, this is it's so rad. I love the way that Emerald has set us up. The location is great. Obviously, being on the showroom floor for something, that what the Marine Corps is doing here, the Marine Corps Association, the Marine Corps League, everything that's coming together. There's an audible and an emotional buzz from just being on the floor. So it's so fun. And just being able to talk to the guests that we have and just snatch some people off the showroom floor, like, hey, you look interesting. Let's have a chin wag or whatever. So fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah. So, to your Scuttlebutt listeners, swing by the Scuttlebutt podcast booth and maybe you'll be interviewed. Maybe Vic will snatch you up.
Yeah. If you make eye contact, there's a good chance you're getting on the microphone. So we're looking at April 28th through May 1st. Is that correct?
Through April 30th.
30th.
It's a
Okay.
3-day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center. And, this is our 5th year up in DC. So if you're an old crusty Marine, you might remember the muddy boot days down. You don't even have to be that old to remember the old muddy boot days down in Quantico. But we moved up to the convention center 5 years ago and we haven't looked back. It's been fantastic. We're able to do so much more with that space that it's really remarkable. This year we have about 7 additional conferences and symposia adjacent to Modern Day Marine. So we have, we have the Log Comms hosting an AI symposium and a hackathon. We have UAS, counter UAS symposium that's interacting with symposia. We have the Reserve Leadership Collective that is gathering reserve officers to talk about the future of the reserves. I mean, it's really becoming what we envisioned it to be when the commandant moved it up there, which is a place for learning and thinking and future thought. It really truly is doing that. I'm so excited. So excited. 5 stages.
Yeah.
We've got yes, it's great.
The amount of Tetris skill that went into putting the showroom floor together is really, really impressive. And all of the events are so cool. Key leader engagements, like you said, all of the symposiums, the events, and there's a new term now for what we were doing.
Small Business Industry Day, and now it's
Yeah.
Marine Corps. Yeah, it's contracts industry day. You know what's really great about it is that we have something for everyone. If you're a young Marine officer or a young Marine just kind of getting into it and wondering, where you want to go with your MOS, we probably have something on the floor for you to handle and explore,
Yeah.
right? We have, or if you want to know how to handle your career, we've got Manpower and Reserve Affairs there. They're going to, they're exhibiting. If you're wondering about the future of the Marine Corps strategically, we've got briefs for that. I mean, we really are this nexus of information for Marines. And then, leaders, senior leaders and defense industry partners. I mean, that's where they go and they show off their wares and they say, hey, look, you wanted this widget with this little doodad. That's the extent of my
No, that's technical. I think that's right off a lot of the,
out of the
terms.
manuals. Yeah. In fact, yes, the widget with the doodad. I'm married to an active duty Marine and he loves to go because the briefs alone are great. Like you'll hear from EWS students, command and staff students, staff and CI Academy students. They will come and do their TED Talks on their research projects. It's great information. It's phenomenal all the way around. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Anxious, but excited.
And for all of those who are just as excited as us, we can start registering now, right?
Holy cow. Yes. Registration's open, and let me tell you, if you've ever been to Modern Day Marine and have registered before, we have an entirely new experience for you. It is so smooth and seamless. You're going to love it. So yeah, registration's open now. Get on there and register. We'd love to see you.
And if you're active duty, it's free of charge, right?
Free of charge. Free to active duty and military spouses.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling. Price is right. Price is
The
right.
price is right. Free 99.
That's right. So, yeah, come on, Walter E. Washington Convention Center in D.C., April 28th through the 30th. And yeah, come say hi. I'll be there. So come by the booth and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Vic. Yeah, sounds great. See you then.
See you then. Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.